There's a coastline where the Mediterranean turns deep sapphire blue, where ancient ports once launched fleets that connected three continents. A land where alphabets were born, where the first musical notes were written, where cities thrived when Rome was still a collection of mud huts. Syria. But when you hear that name today, what image arrives first? Before this journey begins, I want to try something special. I want to see how far these videos are going and how far you are watching from. Welcome to the channel where we explore the world through real stories, hidden places, and unforgettable travel experiences. If you enjoy travel documentary videos like this, please like the video and subscribe. It truly helps this journey reach more corners of the world. Now tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? Let's see how far this video can travel. All right, let's begin. For most of the world, Syria exists only as a synonym for destruction, a place frozen in Aetir 2011, defined entirely by conflict, reduced to rubble and despair in the collective imagination. Yet beneath the dust of recent wars lies a civilization that shaped human history more profoundly than most nations ever will. This is the story the headlines never told. The one that begins not with tanks, but with traders, not with borders, but with the oldest cities on earth. Stand in the right place in Damascus, and you can touch stone older than the pyramids. Walk through the wrong documentary, and you'd never know Damascus existed at all. The Umayyad Mosque rises in the heart of old Damascus, like a statement carved in marble and gold. Built in 715 AD, it stands on ground that has been sacred for over 3,000 years. First a temple to the storm god Hadad, then a Roman sanctuary to Jupiter, later a Christian basilica, and finally this, a mosque with walls that whisper in layers. Inside, the courtyard opens to the sky, surrounded by arcades where light filters through ancient columns. The prayer hall stretches vast and solemn, its ceiling decorated with mosaics that somehow survived centuries of conquest and earthquake. Gold tessellated patterns catch the afternoon sun, creating constellations on the stone floor below. What makes this place extraordinary isn't just its age, it's that it never stopped being used. While European castles became museums and Egyptian temples turned into tourist sites, the Umayyad Mosque continued its original purpose without interruption. The call to prayer here has echoed 5 times daily for 13 centuries. The same rituals, the same devotion, performed in the same space across generations that saw empires collapse and technologies transform everything except this. The mosque holds something else. A small shrine, modest and understated, contains what believers say is the head of John the Baptist. Christians and Muslims both revere the site. For a brief moment in history, before the world learned to draw hard lines between faiths, this building existed as proof that sacred ground could be shared. The Byzantine mosaics depicting paradise still decorate the walls, untouched when the mosque was converted. Preserved by caliphs who saw beauty as universal, Damascus claims a title most cities would never dare assert, the oldest continuously inhabited capital on earth. Not the oldest city, not the oldest settlement, the oldest capital, meaning people have been governing, trading, building, and living here without interruption since before written history began. The evidence sits in layers beneath your feet. Archaeological digs in Damascus reveal occupation dating back to at least 6,300 BC, but continuity is what matters. Other ancient cities were abandoned, conquered, and left empty, buried, and forgotten. Damascus never stopped. When the Aramaeans made it their capital in 1100 BC, they were already building on foundations worn smooth by previous civilizations. The old city exists as a labyrinth of narrow streets, where stone buildings lean toward each other, creating shadowed corridors that stay cool even in brutal summer heat. Courtyards hidden behind wooden doors contain fountains and gardens, private oases invisible from the street. This isn't architectural planning, it's climate engineering developed over millennia. Walk these alleys, and you're following paths worn into the bedrock by Persian merchants, Roman soldiers, Mongol invaders, Ottoman administrators. The street layout hasn't fundamentally changed in 2,000 years. GPS satellites now track routes that were old when Jesus walked the earth. But here's what the history books often skip. Damascus didn't survive through isolation or luck. It survived because of water. The Barada River descends from the anti-Lebanon mountains and transforms an otherwise harsh desert landscape into the fertile Gouda oasis. Ancient engineers built a network of canals so sophisticated that it still functions today. The city exists because someone, thousands of years ago, understood hydrology better than most modern municipalities. That green belt around Damascus, the gardens and orchards that made the city possible, They're mentioned in ancient texts as paradise itself. The word Damascene doesn't just refer to people from Damascus, it describes a method of steel forging that creates patterns resembling flowing water, a technique perfected here and never quite replicated elsewhere. Palmyra appears in the desert like a mirage that refuses to dissolve. Columns rise from sand the color of burnt honey, stretching in perfect rows toward mountains that shimmer in the heat. This was the city that made the desert profitable, the place where Rome's eastern ambitions met the reality of the Silk Road. The ruins you see today, even in their damaged state, represent only a fraction of what Palmyra was. At its height in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, this was one of the wealthiest cities in the Roman Empire, not because of conquest or agriculture, but because of geography and genius. Palmyra sat at the precise intersection where Mediterranean trade routes met the caravans from Persia, India, and China. The city's merchant princes didn't just facilitate trade, they controlled it. They provided security, water, rest, and most importantly, knowledge. They knew which routes were safe, which desert tribes could be trusted, when seasonal rains would make certain paths impassable. That information was worth more than gold. The architecture reflects this wealth. The Great Colonnade stretches over a kilometer, its Corinthian columns once supporting a covered walkway where merchants displayed silk, spices, and precious stones. The Temple of Bel, before its destruction, was one of the most important religious sites in the ancient Middle East, blending Roman, Greek, and Near Eastern architectural traditions into something entirely unique. Then there's the theater, carved into a hillside, its stone seats still bearing the weight of sand and time. Roman theaters exist across the Mediterranean, but Palmyra's faces east, not west, a subtle detail that reveals the city's true orientation. This was Rome's edge, the point where classical civilization blurred into something older and stranger. The tower tombs outside the city proper stand like sentinels, multi-story structures where wealthy families interred their dead in style. Some contained elaborate sculptures and frescoes depicting the deceased at banquets, frozen in eternal celebration. Death here wasn't an end, but a transition, and the architecture reflected that belief. What most people don't grasp about Palmyra is the audacity of its existence. Building a major city in the Syrian desert wasn't just ambitious, it was borderline insane. Water had to be channeled from distant springs through an elaborate system of aqueducts. Food had to be imported. Every building material, every luxury item, every necessity of urban life had to cross vast stretches of hostile terrain. The city worked because it made itself indispensable. Caravans couldn't avoid Palmyra. It was the only reliable source of water and security for hundreds of kilometers in any direction. The Palmyrines didn't conquer the desert, they made it pay rent. Queen Zenobia took this strategic position and turned it into an empire. In the 3rd century AD, while Rome struggled with internal chaos and external threats, Zenobia declared Palmyra independent and proceeded to conquer Egypt, much of Anatolia, and significant portions of the Levant. For a brief, brilliant moment, a desert city ruled the eastern Mediterranean. Rome eventually crushed the rebellion, but the fact that it happened at all reveals something crucial. Palmyra wasn't just wealthy, it was powerful enough to challenge the greatest empire of the ancient world and nearly win. The damage inflicted on Palmyra in recent years has been documented exhaustively. The Temple of Bel reduced to rubble, the Arch of Triumph dynamited, the tower tombs looted and destroyed. But here's what the images of destruction don't show. The site is massive. Vast sections remain, damaged but standing. The Great Colonnade, though scarred, still marches across the desert. The theater still holds its shape against the hillside. What's been lost can never be replaced, but what remains is more than most civilizations leave behind. Palmyra, in ruins, is still more magnificent than most cities at their peak. The stones remember what they were, and if you stand among them at dawn, when the light turns everything gold, you can almost hear the caravans arriving, the merchants negotiating, the city breathing with the confidence of a place that knew it was essential. Aleppo's citadel doesn't sit on a hill. It is a hill, a massive artificial mound rising 50 meters above the old city, crowned with fortifications that have been built, destroyed, and rebuilt for over 4,000 years. The Hittites started it, the Greeks expanded it, the Romans fortified it, the Byzantines reinforced it, the Arabs transformed it, the Crusaders attacked it, the Mongols besieged it. Everyone who passed through left their mark in stone. Approaching the citadel, you cross a bridge built in the 15th century, spanning a moat carved deep into bedrock. The entrance is a masterpiece of defensive architecture, a long stone passage that turns at sharp angles, designed so that even if attackers breached the outer gate, they'd be trapped in a killing corridor with defenders above and ahead. Inside, the citadel reveals its layers like a geological formation of human ambition. Byzantine columns support Ayyubid arches. Mamluk stonework incorporates Roman foundations. Ottoman additions sit atop medieval structures. The architecture doesn't tell a single story, it tells 12 centuries of them simultaneously. The throne hall of the Ayyubid palace dominates the upper level, its vaulted ceiling a masterwork of Islamic geometry. This is where Saladin's son held court, where decisions were made that shaped the fate of Crusader kingdoms. The acoustics are deliberate. A whisper at one end carries clearly to the other, ensuring no conspiracy could hide from the Sultan's ear. But the Citadel's genius isn't in its grandeur, it's in its paranoia. Secret passages honeycomb the structure, allowing defenders to move unseen between levels. Water cisterns carved deep into the bedrock could sustain a garrison for months during siege. Storage chambers held enough grain to outlast any blockade. The builders assumed betrayal, anticipated disaster, planned for the worst possible scenario. That's why it survived. Damascus makes Istanbul look like a teenager. While most cities claim ancient heritage with a few scattered ruins, Damascus presents an unbroken urban continuum stretching back to the 3rd millennium BC. It's not just old, it's continuously inhabited old, which is a completely different category of historical significance. The Umayyad Mosque sits at the heart of the Old City, a structure that manages to be simultaneously Christian and Muslim without contradiction. The site began as a Roman temple to Jupiter, became a Christian basilica dedicated to John the Baptist, then transformed into one of Islam's greatest mosques without erasing what came before. The mosaics on the outer walls, created by Byzantine craftsmen in the 8th century, depict paradise as an idealized landscape of rivers, trees, and architecture. No human figures adhering to Islamic prohibition, but the technique is purely Byzantine. The result is a visual language that belongs to both traditions and neither. Inside, the prayer hall stretches vast and cool, its columns salvaged from the Roman temple. At the center sits a shrine said to contain the head of John the Baptist, venerated by both Muslims and Christians. The mosque doesn't resolve the theological differences between faiths. It acknowledges them and proceeds anyway, creating a physical space where multiple truths coexist. The souks of Damascus spiral outward from the mosque like organic growth, each district specializing in a specific craft. The metalworkers occupy one quarter, their hammering creating a constant percussion. The spice merchants cluster elsewhere, their stalls exploding with color and scent. The textile dealers display silks and cottons in narrow shops unchanged since medieval times. These aren't tourist reconstructions. They're working markets where actual Damascenes conduct actual business using methods refined over centuries. A coppersmith in the Suck doesn't perform tradition. He practices it because it remains the most efficient way to produce what his customers need. Bosra sits in the southern desert, far from the coastal cities that usually dominate Syrian tourism. Most visitors never make it here, which means they miss one of the most perfectly preserved Roman theaters on Earth. The structure seats 15,000, its stage building rising 3 stories, nearly intact. What makes Bosra exceptional is how it survived. In the 12th century, the Ayyubids converted the theater into a fortress, filling the stage area with defensive walls and towers. What would normally destroy a monument actually protected it, preserving the Roman stonework beneath medieval fortifications. Today you can walk through both periods simultaneously, climb the Ayyubid towers, and you're standing on Roman arches. The fortifications that once seemed like vandalism now appear as an act of inadvertent conservation. The theater hosts performances again, its acoustics still flawless after 2 millennia. Sit in the upper rows and a voice from the stage reaches you with perfect clarity, no amplification needed. The Romans understood sound in ways we're still rediscovering. The dead cities of northern Syria present a different kind of preservation. These aren't ruins in the conventional sense. They're complete Byzantine villages, abandoned, gradually as trade routes shifted and populations migrated. No catastrophic destruction, no conquering army, just a slow evacuation that left everything in place. Walking through these sites feels like trespassing in someone's home. Churches still have their altars, houses retain their hearths, oil presses sit ready for olives that will never arrive. The stone is honey-colored limestone, glowing warm in afternoon light. Some structures have collapsed, but many stand essentially complete, their walls, windows, and doorways intact. The most striking aspect is the craftsmanship. These weren't wealthy cities. They were agricultural communities, olive and wine producers serving local markets. Yet the quality of stonework rivals anything in Rome or Constantinople. Door frames are carved with geometric precision. Window arches form perfect curves. The builders took pride in their work, even when creating utilitarian structures for ordinary people. Sergia, one of the best preserved dead cities, includes a Roman bath complex that demonstrates the spread of urban luxuries into rural areas. A farming village of maybe 500 people built a proper bathhouse with hot and cold rooms, precisely engineered heating systems, and decorative columns. It's the ancient equivalent of a small town building an opera house. The ambition seems absurd until you realize it reveals how wealthy these communities actually were. The Euphrates cuts through eastern Syria like a verdict, separating the irrigated west from the desert east. Cities along its banks grew powerful by controlling both the water and the trade routes it facilitated. Dura Europos occupied a cliff above the river, a strategic position that attracted Greeks, Parthians, and Romans in succession. What makes Dura exceptional is its preservation. When the Sasanians besieged the city in 256 AD, the defenders tried to reinforce the walls by piling earth against them. The siege failed, the city was abandoned, and the earthen reinforcements buried the lower portions of buildings, protecting them from weather and looters. When archaeologists excavated the site in the 20th century, they found structures preserved to unusual heights, including the oldest known Christian church and a synagogue with spectacular wall paintings. The synagogue murals depict biblical scenes in a style that blends Greco-Roman technique with Jewish narrative tradition. The paintings show Moses parting the Red Sea, Ezekiel's vision, the temple in Jerusalem. They're crude by classical standards, but powerful in their directness. What makes them historically crucial is that they prove Jewish communities in this period didn't universally reject figurative art. The prohibition varied by time and place, and Dura Europos captured a moment when images were acceptable. The church at Dura is modest, a converted house with one room adapted for worship. It contains a baptismal font decorated with paintings of Christ as the Good Shepherd. This simple structure predates Constantine's legalization of Christianity, offering a glimpse of the faith before it became imperial religion. No grand architecture, no state sponsorship, just a gathering space carved from domestic life. Krak de Chevaliers doesn't compromise. Perched on a hilltop in western Syria, it's the definitive crusader castle, the one all others are measured against. The Knights Hospitaller built it to control the gap between the Mediterranean coast and the interior, and they built it to last forever. The fortifications are concentric, an inner castle surrounded by an outer wall, creating two complete layers of defense. If attackers breached the outer wall, they'd find themselves trapped between barriers, exposed to defenders above. The walls are thick enough that they contain internal passages and chambers. The castle doesn't just repel attacks, it absorbs them, wearing down besiegers through sheer mass and strategic depth. What's remarkable is the amenities. This wasn't a Spartan military outpost. The knights lived here for generations and demanded comfort. The Great Hall features vaulted ceilings and large windows. The chapel is elegantly proportioned. There's a complete bath complex, storage for years of supplies, and a sophisticated water management system that collected rain and channeled it to cisterns throughout the complex. The castle fell only once to Mamluk forces in 1271, and even then only through a forged letter that convinced the garrison to surrender. Military conquest couldn't crack it. Deception succeeded where siege engines failed. Standing on Krak's walls, looking across the valley, you understand why Crusader states lasted 2 centuries. These weren't temporary military camps. They were permanent installations built by people who intended to stay, who invested in infrastructure and defense because they saw themselves as the future. They were wrong about the future, but the stones they left behind still testify to the seriousness of their commitment. The desert south of Damascus holds a ruin that challenges every assumption about Roman architecture. Bosra's theater wasn't built as a freestanding monument. It was carved into a hillside, using the natural slope to support the seating tiers. Later, during the medieval period, the Ayyubids converted the entire structure into a fortress, wrapping it in defensive walls and towers. The result is architectural schizophrenia, a Roman entertainment venue imprisoned inside Islamic military architecture, neither fully visible nor entirely hidden. Walk through Bosra's gates and you're moving through sedimentary layers of power. The theater stage building, perfectly preserved, sits at the center of a medieval citadel. The Romans built for spectacle, the Ayyubids built for survival. Both succeeded, and their contradictory purposes merged into something neither civilization intended. The theater seats 15,000, yet it's invisible from outside the fortress walls. Entertainment became defense, culture became weaponry. The stage is intact, which is rare. Most Roman theaters lost their architectural facades to earthquakes or stone robbers. Here, the Scene Franz stands complete, 3 stories of columns and niches where actors once emerged to address the crowd. The acoustics still work. Stand at the top tier and drop a coin on the stage floor. You'll hear it clearly. The Romans understood sound propagation in ways that wouldn't be scientifically explained for centuries. But here's what makes Bosra genuinely strange. The fortress walls don't just surround the theater, they're built directly onto it, using the Roman structure as foundation. Medieval builders treated the ancient monument as raw material, a convenient stone skeleton to hang their own defenses on. They didn't preserve it, they exploited it, yet in exploiting it, they accidentally saved it from the fate that befell most Roman buildings, gradual dismantling by locals needing construction materials. North toward Aleppo, the landscape shifts from desert to agricultural plains. Aleppo itself is one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited cities, occupied since at least 5000 BC. Its strategic position at the end of the Silk Road made it wealthy and made it a target. Hittites, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Mongols, Ottomans, they all wanted Aleppo. The city's fortunes rose and fell with trade routes and empires, but it never emptied completely. The citadel dominates the city center, a massive fortified mound that's been militarized for millennia. The current structure is primarily medieval, built by the Ayyubids in the 12th century, but archaeological digs have revealed earlier fortifications going back to the 3rd millennium BC. The mound itself is artificial, built up over centuries as successive occupiers added their own layers. Approaching the citadel means crossing a stone bridge and passing through a fortified entrance. Ramp designed to slow attackers. The gateway is a masterpiece of defensive architecture. It doesn't lead straight in, it turns sharply, forcing anyone entering to expose their unshielded side to defenders above. The passage is narrow, the ceiling low, the atmosphere deliberately oppressive. By the time you reach the inner courtyard, you've been channeled through a killing zone that could be defended by a handful of soldiers against hundreds. Inside, the citadel contains mosques, palaces, barracks, and throne rooms. It's not just a military structure, it's a complete administrative complex, a city within a city. The Ayyubid Palace features delicate stone carving and intricate geometric patterns. The mosque has a minaret visible for kilometers. These weren't crude fortifications. They were statements of permanence, declarations that power intended to stay. What recent conflict did to Aleppo is documented elsewhere. What matters here is what survived and what that survival means. Stones, they don't care about ideology. They simply endure or they don't. East of Aleppo, the Euphrates River cuts through Syria on its way to Iraq. Along its banks lie the remains of Mari, a Bronze Age city that controlled river trade for centuries. Mari's palace, excavated in the 1930s, contained over 300 rooms and produced an archive of 25,000 cuneiform tablets. These weren't religious texts or royal propaganda. They were administrative records, letters between officials, trade agreements, census data, the mundane paperwork of running a kingdom. The tablets reveal a sophisticated bureaucracy. Mari's kings corresponded with rulers across Mesopotamia, negotiating alliances and trade deals. The palace had specialized departments for different aspects of governance. There were officials responsible for irrigation, for tax collection, for managing the workforce that maintained the city's infrastructure. This wasn't primitive tribal organization. This was statecraft. The palace itself shows evidence. Of central planning, rooms are arranged around courtyards. Corridors connect different administrative sections. There's a throne room designed for receiving foreign dignitaries, decorated with murals showing religious ceremonies and battle scenes. The artwork isn't as refined as what you'd find in Egypt or Syria, but it serves the same purpose, projecting power through visual representation. Mari fell to Hammurabi of Babylon around 1761 BC. The conquest was thorough. The palace was burned, the walls were dismantled, and the city never recovered its former importance. But the destruction preserved the cuneiform archive. The tablets were baked hard by the fire that destroyed the building, turning them from fragile clay into durable ceramic. Hammurabi's violence became archaeology's gift. Moving northwest from the Euphrates, you enter the region called the Dead Cities, a landscape dotted with Byzantine ghost towns, abandoned between the 8th and 10th centuries. These weren't destroyed by war. They were victims of economic and climatic shifts. The villages thrived during the Byzantine period, producing olive oil for export. When trade routes changed and rainfall patterns shifted, the economic foundation collapsed. Populations migrated to areas with better prospects, leaving behind intact stone villages. The preservation is unsettling. Churches stand complete with their roofs gone. Houses retain their second stories. Market buildings and public baths show clear architectural detail. Walk through these sites and you're moving through frozen moments. The stones remember their purpose even though the people are centuries gone. What makes the dead cities archaeologically valuable is their completeness. Usually, abandoned settlements get picked apart. Stones get reused, metal gets salvaged, wood rots or burns. Here, the isolation preserved everything. The buildings show how ordinary Byzantines lived, not emperors or bishops, but farmers and merchants. The houses are modest, but well built, stone walls supporting wooden roofs. The churches are small, designed for village congregations rather than urban crowds. Some buildings have inscriptions giving construction dates and naming the builders. Others have carved decorations, simple geometric patterns, or Christian symbols. The craftsmanship is competent but not exceptional. These weren't prestige projects. They were functional structures built to last, and last they did, long after their builder's civilization vanished. One site, Sergila, preserves a complete bath complex with separate hot and cold rooms. The heating system used a hypocaust, channels under the floor where hot air circulated. This technology required maintenance and fuel. When the village was abandoned, the bath stopped functioning immediately, but the infrastructure remained, showing exactly how Roman bathing culture persisted in Byzantine provincial towns. Another site, Al-Bara, contains pyramidal tombs dating from the 5th century. These aren't Egyptian-style pyramids. They're small stone structures, maybe 5 meters tall, built to house sarcophagi. The design is unique to this region, a local interpretation of monumental burial. Some tombs have inscriptions identifying the deceased. Others are anonymous. All of them indicate wealth sufficient to afford permanent stone memorials. The dead cities aren't dramatic. They don't overwhelm with scale or decoration. Their power comes from their ordinariness, from the fact that they preserve everyday Byzantine life in stone. These villages were never important enough to be destroyed deliberately or valuable enough to be completely looted. They simply stopped being useful and were left to time. Syria's coast is brief, a narrow strip where the mountains meet the Mediterranean. Here sits Tardis, a port city with a Crusader cathedral that's still standing. The Cathedral of Our Lady of Tortosa was built by Crusaders in the 12th century and converted to a mosque after the Crusader states collapsed. Later, it became a museum, then a mosque again. Its architectural identity has shifted with political control, but the stones remain essentially unchanged. The cathedral is fortress-like, built when ecclesiastical architecture served military purposes. The walls are thick, the windows narrow, the design defensive. This wasn't a place for contemplation alone. It was a strong point, part of the coastal defense network the Crusaders maintained. Religion and warfare merged in these border structures. The coastline here lacks the drama of other Mediterranean shores. No towering cliffs, no hidden coves. Just a flat meeting of land and water where fishing boats pull up on narrow beaches. The simplicity is part of its character. This was never a landscape designed to impress. It was built to function. Inland from Tardis, the terrain rises into the Alawite Mountains. These aren't the snow-capped peaks of the north. They're lower, covered in scrub and scattered trees, creating a natural barrier between coast and interior. For centuries, this region sheltered minority populations who retreated here when empires turned hostile. The mountains provided isolation, a place to maintain distinct identities away from centralizing powers. In these hills sits Masyaf Castle, a fortress tied to one of history's most misunderstood groups. The assassins, more formally, the Nizari Ismailis, used this castle as a stronghold in the 12th and 13th centuries. Popular culture turned them into mystical killers. Reality was more bureaucratic. They were a religious sect caught between larger powers, using targeted assassination as a political tool when they lacked armies. The castle reflects this pragmatism. It's not built for massive sieges. It's designed for control of the surrounding valleys, a watchtower converted into a headquarters. The walls are positioned to observe roads rather than withstand prolonged bombardment. Defense mattered, but so did information. From here, the assassins monitored movement through the region, maintaining influence through intelligence as much as violence. The castle's most famous resident was Rashid ad-Din Sinan, known to Crusaders as the Old Man of the Mountain. He negotiated with Saladin, corresponded with Richard the Lionheart, and managed a network of agents across the Levant. The castle was his administrative center, the place where strategy was planned and operatives were dispatched. After the Mongols destroyed assassin power in the 13th century, Masyaf became just another fortress, passing through Ottoman and later Syrian control. Today it sits empty, its strategic value gone, but its history intact. Further east, the anti Lebanon range marks Syria's border with Lebanon. Mount Hermon dominates this area, its peak reaching over 2,800 meters. In winter, snow covers the summit. In summer, the mountain provides a visual anchor, visible from Damascus on clear days. The range creates a rain shadow. West of the mountains, Tia moisture from the Mediterranean supports forests. East, the land dries into the Syrian desert. This meteorological divide shaped settlement patterns. The western slopes were farmed. The eastern side supported only pastoralism and trade routes. Damascus owes its existence to this geography. The city sits where the Barada River emerges from the anti-Lebanon, creating an oasis in otherwise arid terrain. For millennia, Damascus has been continuously inhabited because water made it viable. The river allowed agriculture. Agriculture supported population. Population created trade. The city's longevity isn't mysterious. It's hydraulic logic made permanent. The Barada doesn't look impressive. It's not wide or particularly deep. But in this climate, a reliable water source is worth more than size. The river splits into multiple channels as it enters Damascus, irrigating the Ghouta, an agricultural belt that historically fed the city. And without the Barada, Damascus doesn't exist. With it, the city became unavoidable, a necessary stop on routes between the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia. In the desert east of Damascus, Qasr al-Hayr al-Sharqi rises from emptiness. This is an Umayyad desert palace built in the 8th century when Islamic architecture was still finding its vocabulary. The structure combines influences Roman engineering, Persian decorative traditions, Byzantine spatial concepts. The result is distinctly Islamic, but shows its inheritance clearly. The palace wasn't a permanent residence. It was a retreat, a hunting lodge, a place where caliphs could escape urban formality. The desert provided space for that escape. The palace had baths, courtyards, reception halls. Water came from an elaborate system of underground channels called qanats, Persian technology adapted to Syrian conditions. What's striking is the ambition. Building this in the desert required importing materials, labor, expertise. The palace announced power through impracticality. Only an empire could afford such gestures. When the Umayyads fell and the capital moved to Baghdad, the palace lost its purpose. The desert reclaimed what humans abandoned. Today the walls stand, but the interior is gone. The structure is a shell, impressive in outline but empty of detail. Syria's northeast is different terrain entirely. The Jazira, a flat plain between the Tigris and Euphrates, was historically Mesopotamia's northwestern edge. Here the soil is fertile when water is available, but rainfall is unreliable. Irrigation made this area agriculturally productive. When irrigation systems failed, productivity collapsed. The region's history is a cycle of development and abandonment tied to water management. In this plain sits Tel Halaf, an archaeological site revealing one of the earliest complex societies in human history. The settlement dates to around 6000 BC, when people were just beginning to transition from mobile hunter-gatherers to settled farmers. Tel Halaf gives its name to a pottery style, distinctive painted ceramics found across northern Mesopotamia and Syria. The designs are geometric, precise, showing aesthetic sophistication alongside agricultural innovation. This wasn't primitive survival, it was a culture with time and resources for art. The site's most important finds are now scattered in museums, but the tell itself remains, a low mound rising from the plain. Beneath it are layers of occupation, each stratum representing a different phase of human development. The bottom layers show early farming. Higher up, evidence of trade networks. Higher still, signs of social hierarchy. The mound is a vertical timeline compressed into earth. Syria's complexity comes from this layering. Every region contains multiple paths, each leaving traces that shape the present. The country isn't a single story, but a series of overlapping narratives, some complementary, others contradictory. Geography provided the stage. Civilizations performed their histories on it, then exited, leaving the props behind. What remains is a landscape saturated with memory, where every stone potentially marks something lost. The dead cities show Byzantine prosperity and collapse. Masyaf reveals medieval political calculation. Damascus demonstrates the power of a reliable water source. Tel Halaf exposes the origins of settled life. These aren't disconnected facts. They're chapters in a continuous transformation. the story of how humans adapted to this specific terrain over thousands of years. The land shaped the choices available. People made those choices, built their structures, fought their wars, then vanished. The structures remain, silent evidence of ambitions that once seemed permanent. Syria's tragedy is partly this weight of history. The land has seen too much, survived too many empires, absorbed too many conquests. Each wave of change leaves scars that don't fully heal before the next wave arrives. The stones remember everything. They've watched civilizations rise with confidence and fall with certainty. They've seen borders redrawn, religions replace each other, languages shift. Through it all, the geography persists, indifferent to human drama, but shaping it nonetheless. The mountains still create rain shadows, the rivers still carve valleys, the desert still expands and contracts with climate cycles. These processes operate on timescales that make human history look brief. Yet within that brevity, tremendous things occurred. Cities were imagined and built, trade routes connected distant peoples, ideas traveled alongside goods, transforming societies. Art was created, not for museums, but for daily life. All of this happened here in this specific place because the geography made it possible. Understanding Syria means understanding this relationship between land and human ambition, between what the terrain offers and what people choose to build with those offerings. The story isn't finished. The land remains, waiting with geological patience for whatever comes next, ready to shape new chapters as it shaped all the others. The stones don't need your sympathy. They've outlasted empires that thought themselves eternal. They watched Alexander's armies pass, saw Roman legions march, felt Mongol hooves thunder across trade routes now buried under sand. Every conqueror believed they were writing the final chapter. The stones are still here, the conquerors are footnotes. What you've seen isn't a complete picture. It's fragments, carefully selected pieces of a civilization that spans 10,000 years. The Umayyad Mosque represents 13 centuries of continuous worship. Palmyra shows what happens when commerce meets ambition in the desert. The dead cities prove that even prosperity is temporary. Aleppo's citadel demonstrates that defense is always expensive and never permanent. Damascus reveals what a reliable water source can sustain across millennia. But here's what the ruins actually teach. Civilizations don't fall because they're weak. They fall because circumstances change and they can't adapt quickly enough. The Byzantine villages died when trade routes shifted. Palmyra collapsed when Rome could no longer guarantee security. The Umayyads lost Damascus when their political base moved east. Each decline had specific causes, none of them mysterious. The mystery is why we keep expecting permanence from systems that are inherently temporary. Syria's geography created opportunities. Humans exploited those opportunities brilliantly. They built cities in deserts, carved temples into cliffs, engineered water systems that still function. Then circumstances changed. New powers arrived. Climate shifted. Trade found different routes. The structures remained, becoming monuments to choices that once made perfect sense. The recent damage is real and documented. Temples destroyed, mosaics shattered, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. But the deeper loss is what those headlines obscured. Syria became a symbol, a shorthand for catastrophe. And in becoming that symbol, it stopped being a place with actual history, with layers of human achievement that predate and will outlast any current crisis. The stones remember when Damascus was the capital of an empire stretching from Spain to India. They remember when Aleppo's markets connected 3 continents. They remember when Palmyra made the desert profitable. That memory doesn't erase recent suffering. It contextualizes it. This land has survived worse and continued. Not unchanged, never unchanged, but continuous. What comes next isn't written in stone, despite what the monuments suggest. The geography remains. The rivers still flow when they're allowed to. The mountains still create microclimates. The coastline still provides access to Mediterranean trade. The underlying conditions that made Syria significant for 5,000 years haven't disappeared. They're dormant, waiting for circumstances that allow them to matter again. The world sees ruins and assumes endings. People who actually study ruins know better. Every collapsed structure once replaced something older. Every abandoned city was built over previous settlements. The archaeological layers prove this isn't a story of decline. It's a story of constant transformation, where each ending creates space for new beginnings. Syria's identity isn't located in any single period. It's not Roman or Byzantine or Umayyad or Ottoman. It's the accumulation of all those periods, the sediment of continuous occupation and transformation. The stones don't belong to one era. They belong to all of them and to whatever comes next. That's not optimism. It's observation based on 5,000 years of evidence. This land has proven its capacity for renewal. The question isn't whether it will continue. The question is what form that continuation takes and whether the world will notice when it happens. The stones will be here regardless. They've already waited longer than any human lifetime. They can wait longer still.